Okay, we're live everywhere.
We're live everywhere. But welcome to the first Effect office hours. I'll introduce our host, Kit. Kit, why don't you say
hello. Hello, I'm Kit. Good evening, everyone. Yes, what is this thing? Well, Maxwell, you stream all the time to great success about different projects, and then we post those to YouTube. I was thinking it could also be valuable because we get a lot of questions to more explicitly source questions from people and answer them live. So a little more of a responsive, adaptive format, something a little more rambly. So we can, answer people's real questions, maybe look at code examples. Please send us questions, examples. I've already collected some. If you signed up in the Luma page thing, you could have asked a question, and those have been gathered to some degree here. But also post them in the chat or on Discord, and we'll collect them for next time. And yeah, we can look at more in-depth questions. Maybe this will turn into videos that I could record some point in the future if there's a lot of confusion, or if it's worth something, giving it some more effort beyond just whatever top of extemporaneous rambling happens live. But hello, everybody. Hello, Gerben, Leonie, Tyler, Earth, Peter, Johannes. Or Johannes. I don't know who it is. Stream Elements. Nice name. Thanks for joining. And if you signed up early, I only added the question to ask a question about 2 days ago. So I should have done that at the beginning. Didn't really think through. But if you have any questions, throw them into the chat, and we will try to, just look at them. Hopefully that contextualizes it. I think it makes kind of sense what an office hours is, but we'll figure it out and refine it over time. So
I'm clicking around all the buttons to try to figure out how this platform works.
Theoretically on Riverside, we can pluck you out of the audience onto stage with us. But I don't know where that button lives. That might have been a hallucination of their documentation.
I really don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
But I'm sure we'll figure it out either this time or we can figure it out for the next time. I think you guys can actually request
it's
the
your
call
fault.
in.
It's your fault. Do you see a button? Can someone test this? Sebastian, you're a known entity. Oh, wait, no, show on stream. I can show somebody on the stream. Oh, I can show it's no Hannes. There we go. All right. So that's nice. Obviously, that didn't invite you to join us. I don't know what this timer means. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Oh, it's how long I want to show it for.
The request live call-in button is dimmed out for me. Okay. And then it's
so clearly that's a setting
not
that we can
dimmed out for
configure.
others.
Not for me. Okay. All right. So, Tom, you've been flagged.
You've been flagged.
I don't know. You're suspicious. Oh, afraid to click. Okay. Yeah. Don't. Oh, yeah. Ben. Oh, all right. Ben, I know you lodged the question here. You're actually the top of the list. So, hello, Ben Jacobson.
Yeah. Hi.
Wow. You're on. I'm sorry if you didn't expect to be pulled into this whole thing.
I didn't. Very cool. I'm testing this feature of this thing, but I can also expand on my question.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's get started.
Let's
go. Otherwise, we'll just spend the next half an hour trying to figure out Riverside.
Okay.
So this is
big
good.
Fan of Effect, first time caller. So we have we use Prisma a lot. We use Effect a lot, and we have this wrapper for Prisma, and we use HTTP API. So a lot of our handlers kind of do a lot of business logic, or we have helper functions. I'd love to start migrating to kind of well-defined services. But part of that is we use transactions a lot. And so injecting a service, like when you create an HTTP server, could work like a user's service, let's say, and get user. But let's say we have 10 get users calls that needs to happen in a transaction. Just curious, like how others have kind of handled this, injecting services that are maybe dependent on some request context, or maybe another way to look at it could be like a database, database per customer. And so if you have services that model that database, at request time, you would need to inject all of those customer specific, services with the right database injected, inside. I don't know if I'm using the right terminology. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
No, that's interesting. Maxwell, do you have any ideas here? It sounds like maybe something. We have another question with layer map, and I'm not sure if this would have something to do with that. But anyway, take it away, Max.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we can get a little more information about the current design, and then we can go from there. Is the particular type of query that you're trying to execute like a direct call to Prisma, or is it hidden behind like a client method on the service, or like what does it look like now? Because
right
now
all of our helpers have a let's say we have let's say we're creating submission for a task. We do task management. Create a submission for a task that has a bunch of other sub resources. I do that submission creation in a single transaction, right? So I want all the submitted data to save or none of it to save. So if we have a task service to create the high level task, and then a task submission service to create each, sub submission task, we run that in a transaction at this point. And right now, those aren't services. Right now, those are just like helper functions that all have a DB dependency. We have a DB service, and the DB service can either be the default Prisma global database, or we have a with transaction helper that then injects the right DB, creates a Prisma transaction, injects the right DB. So if you call any of those helper functions from within the with transaction effect, it happens within a transaction. And so if we were to then extract that out, not into like a helper function that depends on a DB, but a service that doesn't depend on a DB, it's assumed the service is initialized with the right DB. How does it play with transactions? And I'm not saying everything needs to be a service. Like maybe what we're doing is fine for now. It just,
yeah, I think this is one of those situations where having a dependency exist on a service method could be like a reasonable thing to do. You could also have like a database service that allows you to get the correct context for a given like part of the data. I don't know if like it's a database per customer or something like that, but you could have built into the database service itself, you could have the logic to pull out the correct tenant from that database service in your method. Like, because the thing when you have request level dependencies, generally speaking, those can't be lifted into the constructor of a service, because the constructor of a service is built like when your application is constructed. So if you have like something that's happening at request time, usually you want to inject that at request time. And so in those situations, like for situations like that where the database is a request level dependency, that's kind of like when having service method level dependencies is okay. Like we encourage, we even have our language service plugin raises like a warning if you have methods on your service that have dependencies, but you can shut that off if you know that like something is request level. If it's request level, then it probably makes you like in that case it could actually make sense. Like a good example is actually I recently refactored the like chat service in our AI SDK. So like we have like the language model service, and then there's the chat service which builds on top of it. And every time you do a generation with the chat service, it depends to like a history that is also included in the service. But the language model dependency, originally and wrongly, I had it being extracted at the constructor level for the chat. But in reality, that needs to be a service method level dependency, because you may want to use different language models for every interaction, like maybe OpenAI first and then Anthropic later, whatever. So, so there are situations where having service level, like method level dependencies are okay. It really just depends on the constraints you have. One way would be to have a database service that pulls out the correct tenant.
Yeah.
Like you could have in the context for the request, the tenant itself, the database service could be pulled out in the service constructor, and then in the actual method for that service, you just depend on that request context. And you can use the information in there. So
having a dependency DB connection, like that's how it's currently modeled: effect, void, never, DB connection.
Okay, this the second variant using
that's
the
how
R.
it's modeled,
Okay.
and it works great. It just doesn't necessarily like a lot of the layer examples initiate the database, outside these methods, but maybe that just doesn't. It's not what our use case is designed to do.
Like I said, the other way you could do this is if you go to that. Can you create? Actually, wait. I'm in your Z, aren't I? Where are we here?
I think you can follow me to this one.
Yeah, we can have like a third. Oh God. We can have a third task thingy in here, which instead of depending on the DB connection, might depend on some like DB context, right? And so the database connection is actually constructed in the task service here, so that you only have like one central location where you're actually creating connections to that database. But to actually get the correct tenant or the correct database, whatever, like it depends. If you have a separate database per tenant, then maybe having a requirement on a database connection is fine. But if you have like a single database with many tenants in there, having this kind of design would also like be fine. It kind of depends on the like architecture.
Cool. I want to give other people a chance to speak. So.
I mean, this is could you? I was a little confused though, Max. What was the difference between like a DB connection and a DB context? What would a context be in this case?
If context would just be something like, I don't know, the name of the tenant that you need to pull out, or other information relevant to like the particular database access you want. Like maybe context is a bad name here. It could be like tenant instead, right? But the point I was making here is if you have many tenants in the same database, task 3 design works. If you have a separate database per tenant, then task 2 is probably the design you have to go with. Or you build the service for your tenant along with the database connection on every request. Right? So like if you do that, then you don't need this at all. You have a couple of different options. It really just depends on how you want to go about doing things. Like you could build task service and database service with every request if every request requires a separate connection. It just feels like this design, the task 2 version, is the best if you have separate database per tenant. And there may be like other ways I'm not thinking about to do this. This is just like what immediately comes to mind.
Yeah. So this database service is kind of what we have today. We have a with transaction, and then we pass an effect inside, and then anything inside that the database connection or database context, whatever, is injected with the transaction context instead. And so the methods don't care whether it's using just the regular connection or a transaction connection. But it just follows that pattern, and this works great today.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's worth spending a little more time on because like there are a couple of scenarios where there are a couple of patterns for layers, and I think it follows the Pareto principle, whatever distribution, where 90% of the time, ideally, right, your layer hierarchy, your internal application dependencies are static and can be constructed up front.
Yeah.
But then there's sort of two common scenarios that break from that pattern. And one is scope, which is why that scope is an R parameter, and you might provide a scope at the top of your application, or you might provide it in some non-application scope. You might have some local scope where a request scope or something, even whatever. It's a useful utility you can use in many scenarios. And the other one is transactions, I think, where you don't want transactions around your entire application lifecycle, probably, but more along, an HTTP request response or some subset of that. So I think, yeah, this is totally a good pattern. I think some people, me in the past as well, feel like, oh, this is some anti-pattern because generally you think you should 100% of the time. Potentially, it might be transmitted implicitly that you should always resolve layer dependencies once at the top of your application. But no, this is totally a viable pattern, and you kind of need to do this. It's just a less common scenario that does occur with exactly these circumstances. So
there have been other people who have had the whole tenant issue before, and I'm thinking now another way to go about doing this. Are your tenants like? I'm assuming that they can change at runtime. Like you can have many more added or removed at runtime, or do you know sort of a static list of tenants up front? Because one way to do this also could be to use a layer map, and where the keys in your layer map are the tenant, and then you have a layer coming back as well for that. Because the nice thing about layer map is that you can build a service once based on a particular key, and then every time you try to access that service again later, you could it's cached. And I think if I remember correctly, sorry Ben, I'm gonna mute there's just some background noise. The layer map, if I remember correctly, there's a way to set a time to live as well. So you could say if a particular tenant hasn't been accessed in, I don't know, 10 minutes, shut down that connection or something like that. So there is that option as well, going for a layer map situation. I haven't done it myself, so I can't advise as what the DX would be or UX would be, but I know that layer map is also a very viable solution here.
Maybe it's worth. Somebody else actually asked about. I think Morgan asked about layer maps, so we can sort of use this as an opportunity to briefly show those off.
Yeah.
With this little pseudocode example, let me simplify to this version, because I think this is kind of what we're representing, or recommending here. The version that you propagated a database connection in a local environment, and just to be clear, these are basically. The fancy functional term is isomorphic. The normal layperson term is equivalent. Layer dependencies. The R parameter is basically morally equivalent to function arguments. It just makes it slightly easier, especially in that case, in a really common case where your internal dependencies are totally static and you don't have different database connections for different. You have the same user service for your whole application. You have the same database for your whole application. That tends to be easier to use the R parameter because it'll automatically propagate that for you. So anyway, I'll delete this version. And it's so nice that we both get to type.
I have to literally look at the JS docs to remind myself how to use this.
I have an example. I have from this. So let me actually grab this real quick. We'll see if this works.
Also, while we're doing this, I'm just going to answer a few questions that came up in chat. Most of the folks who have provided suggestions about how to do this, the solutions are all valid. There just are many different ways to propagate service. Not many different ways to propagate services. There are just many different ways to design around this problem. So I think most of the solutions we've heard are viable. But Peter asked about. With V4, the plan is you said that the plan is to simplify APIs and remove multiple ways to do the same thing. What is the API for services going to look like? Effect.service, context tag, something else. Will it handle when you have default implementations as well? When you choose no default, multiple variants, blah, blah, blah. So the answer to that question is right now, the API doesn't look too much different. We've removed a few different APIs that didn't make sense. And in V4, we're, instead of having this context and tag terminology, because we found that that was kind of hard for people to mentally map to what they were actually doing. In V4, we have this concept of, instead of context, the term is going to be services, literally just a bag of services. So instead of context, actually, I'll just edit here as well with Kit. I need to remap my double J to escape. Sorry, I downloaded Zed today, folks. So if I'm slow, that's why. So for 4.0, we're still kind of toying around with different naming. We were, for a little while, we were using service map. This was like the new term for context, and I think we still have this in the code. But now we're sort of thinking, well, service map is just another like layer around just a group of services, right? So context may become services. We haven't fully settled on the naming yet. And then, I'm sorry, I saw myself say that I removed Ben, but I didn't remove Ben. That must have been Kit.
That's okay. I see what you type is me, I think. That is so strange. I think we're both logged in as the same account. I think we're doing something crazy.
Okay, well.
Because I saw something typed earlier that I didn't type, so that's very weird.
The other change that we've made is, so tag now becomes service. So it's literally like, instead of context and tag, it's just services and service, where services is a mapping of, let's actually just put this in parentheses. Services is a mapping between some key and a service, right? But we haven't fully settled on like the naming here. I think in the v4 code base, it's still service map and service.key. I can't remember exactly. We're trying to make it better. My class extends services.service.service.service. Exactly.
I think it's service.key at the moment.
Anyway, we are trying to make the naming better. And the idea will be that all the terminology centers around services, because that's like basically all we're doing is we're trying to build services. Effect.service will be like the recommended way to construct services, especially if they have a default implementation. If they don't have a default implementation, then just creating the identifier, like the service, in this case the tag, will still be what's recommended for now. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Does that mean multiple service maps will be services? Yeah, exactly. Do you have plan? Hang on. Let me just go back a few minutes. How is a layer different to contexts/service map? So a layer is a good question. Before we get into layer map and everything like that, maybe good to just quickly review what a layer even is. A layer is basically just a thing that builds a context. It's a constructor, an effectful constructor for a group of services, which we in 3.0 we call a context object. And all a layer does is it's a constructor for a context. Most of the time your layers are only producing, when you create a layer, when you say like layer.effect or whatever, most of the time you're only returning one service. But then when you go to compose your layers together with like layer.provide or layer.merge or layer.merge all, you're creating like a graph of layers in your app, which is why like when you eventually go to provide that layer to your program, the layer is built, produces the context, which is then provided to your effect program. So if you want to simplify it down, a layer is just an effectful constructor for a service or a set of services.
Yeah. And just to like back up, zoom out even a little more, like what is the problem that is being solved by layers? And it's basically the problem of, dependency injection, which itself, it deals with sort of, your own internal application sort of dependency graph. So at the top of your app, you have your whole app, which will internally have many features, many functionalities. I don't know, let's say we're building a Luma app, which is the thing that you signed up for this with, right? So there'd be like some kind of event service. And internally, this will need to talk to get users, user services, and probably like some kind of calendar service. And this user service will need to depend on, your Postgres database possibly, or maybe just actually I should call it your database service. So there's this kind of internal, and maybe the calendar does as well. And maybe there are also, like analytics services or event services that you need to shoot things off into, whatever. I guess that would be handled by logging probably, but one would imagine some other service, let's say a notification service definitely would be needed to called in these various places for some reason. So you have this internal dependency graph, and without layers, there's a bit of boilerplate here, right? Generally, many large applications that are the traditional server architecture have some really big main file, some entry point, where you'll need to construct your user event service rather. And this is a class. And in order to construct it, you basically need to pass in your user service. But that would have been needed to be created earlier. And that would have had to be provided its dependencies and so on and so forth. So you're going to have this big nested, there's going to be this tree structure implicitly in the construction of this sort of mega object that is your application. And some of these services might need to be constructed asynchronously. They might need to acquire resources that you'll need to release later. And generally, in my experience, in various companies I've worked for where they didn't use effect systems or had these patterns, you have this giant, ever-growing, ever-churning main entry point file that every time anyone makes a change, anytime anyone adds, notification service to user service, they need to update that file. So it's this locus of massive churn and complexity. You get all sorts of merge conflicts. It only gets uglier over time because of all the churn. It's hard to keep it neat. It's hard to keep everything co-located, in one place. So it gets very ugly and messy. And the idea of layers really is to simplify this, is to break everything, to have like one canonical descriptor of how to construct a particular node in that dependency graph and what it depends on, and let these be co-located with the definitions of those services. And you can have different implementations. You can have the live user service that depends on the actual Postgres database service and the whatever Kafka notification service, or you can, in tests, have an in-memory user service that depends on nothing and exposes some ability to just do fancy test things, insert a bunch of random users, etc. So there are kind of these Lego nodes for constructing your application, and the layers are what allows these to be effectful and acquire and release resources, and to be constructed in parallel from the leaf nodes up. So because these have no dependencies, no transitive dependencies, they can all sort of be kicked off in parallel, theoretically, as much as JavaScript can do parallel processing, and so on and so forth, and bubble up until the whole app is constructed. It's a bit of a subtle thing because you kind of need a full, like it does have this, there's a bit of a debt of onboarding and of knowledge. And you need a certain degree of complexity before it pays for itself. But certainly if you've ever been exposed to like a 500, 1,000, 2,000 growing lines of code, main or entry point file, I think you can probably imagine the kinds of problems it solves. I hope that makes sense. I need to do a video on this with animations.
There have been a bunch of really good questions in the chat about layers and things like that, so I figured maybe we can like mock out some stuff. And there are a few things to talk about as well. Somebody mentioned that they are confused about like provide merge and provide merge, and how they work, when to use what. And somebody mentioned that they just pray until the type error goes away. And in a way, that is the right thing to do. Maybe not the praying part, but like following the types is kind of what I'm getting at. And we can sort of like mock out what I'm getting at here. So if we simulate like what Kit has here, right? We have an events thingy that never fails. We're gonna mock out a few things and we can like take a look at this. But like, let's say we have events. Then we're gonna use strings here, but you could imagine these would actually be like service identifiers if we had them. So we have an event layer, which depends on users and also depends on calendar, right? We have a user layer, maybe And this thing depends on database or notifications. And, oops.
Oh, sorry, I formatted you.
Sorry, this does this. Right? And then similarly, we also have a calendar service which does this. Calendar layer, which...
Yeah, just made interfaces.
And this produces a calendar, right? Why can I only see lines 46 through 50 now? What did I click?
Oh no.
I'm gonna just... Okay, here we go. So anyways, let's imagine we have like something that looks like this, right? We have a set of services that have dependencies on each other, and we want to learn how to... We can probably just shorten this to it doesn't matter. The formatting is what it is. We have a set of layers, they depend on one another, right? I always tell people this, and I'm like not kidding about it. Like, if you just follow the types when you're constructing your main layer graph, in like 90% of circumstances, you're going to be fine. And I also want to address a second question that we got at the same exact time that we talk about like composing layers together, which is, where was the... Should all the services be provided at the edge of the application? Can I provide in the service itself? So there's two things to address here. So let's take a look at, like, if we were to just merge all these together into one layer, right? So const main layer equals layer.merge, merge. Sorry, how do I, like, just accept the tab? There we go. Why is this merge all? When we look at the actual type of main layer here, we're getting a layer that correctly gives us... Oh, actually, this is... Okay. We're getting a layer here that does correctly give us like all of the things we want, right? We want events, we want users, we want calendar. In our application, we want to be able to use all of these things. But we see that like we have a bunch of different requirements in our layer graph, right? So if we do not do what I call like locally providing services, right? If we try to provide services at the root of the application, we can do that, and that's fine. We would have to look at like what each of these layers require and make sure that we've satisfied those things. So that's why I say like if you follow the types, 90% of the time you'll be fine. So if we look at event layer needs both users and calendar to be provided, right? So we could go like this, layer.provide users layer. And if we look at it now, if we maybe extract this really quickly, intermediate. I'm going to call it intermediate for now because we're going to fix this in a second.
And we might end up with a few, but that's okay.
I am so
here,
sorry.
I'll add the type. I'll toggle the type annotations here.
Yeah, go ahead. So if you look at the types here now, this is why we say that local provision of dependencies in like many cases is the best thing to do, because like, okay, we've tried to start satisfying the dependencies of events by providing it users, right? Because event layer needs users, and that's great. But because users needs a database and notifications, now we have to provide those things as well. And events also needs a calendar to be able to function, right? So we can start doing that, layer.provide calendar, and we can talk about what provide does in a second. So we've erased, like,
Wait, I don't think event layer needs... Oh, it does need a calendar. Why did that not show up in the... Sorry, one sec. That's odd. Shouldn't that have shown up in the type there? Let me regenerate this, just because that's what I'm going to be depending on. What? That's odd.
I don't know. But anyways,
that could just be mine. Yeah, sorry.
So when we say like locally providing dependencies is usually the best thing to do, it's because if you try to start composing your layers at the root of your application, you're going to end up with a really messy set of layers. All that to say, like, you can absolutely do that. That's not a problem. Like, you can do all the composition at the root. It's just like locally providing dependencies usually ends up with a much cleaner, like, root level layer where you can literally just take all the dependencies that the root of your app needs, merge them all together, and then you're done. Otherwise, you have to like do all the composition you would have done locally at the root. So somewhere you're doing the composition. It just depends on where. Now, maybe Kit can talk about like what provide merge and provide merge do and why they exist.
Yeah. And the reason why we didn't see, I was confused there is because I made interfaces that had no internals, and I'm still getting used to TypeScript, and they all, I guess, equal each other because they didn't have any methods or any identities to distinguish one another. So they were all interchangeable. Structural typing is tricky. Let me delete some of this stuff just to focus on the ingredients. Like these are our Lego pieces. What if I do R here? Can I make that? No, that doesn't work. All right, whatever. I don't know why I'm getting wrapped so aggressively, but somewhere I've said something incorrectly. So it's good to think in terms of this tree structure, where an app needs, like, you can read this basically. If something is dedented or beneath it, it's its direct child. It requires that. So events needs users and calendar service. Users needs database service and notifications. Calendar service needs database service and notification service. And these layers are basically can be read as I forget exactly what the types are called themselves, but this is the output. So an event layer will generate some event service for you, and then you have the inputs. So it's kind of like a function, though I guess it's swapped, right? Because usually we read functions from left to right, but once you get used to that, it does make sense. So we depend on concretely users and calendar, and we get out an event service. And obviously this will have some implementation that will actually use some users and calendar interface to fulfill the events interface. We're mocking stuff out here just to focus on what these methods do. So layer.provide, what this does is if we have two layers, layer 1 and layer 2, we will provide some layer to another layer. And let's pretend like that layer 2 will give us an A. So its output is an A if we can give it a B. And therefore, in order to fully satisfy this layer, we have to provide its B input. We have to erase that. So if layer 1 has no inputs and just outputs a B, by providing that layer to layer 2 to layer 1, it deletes from the input set the values in the output set. So to make that concrete here, let's just change our calendar to only depend on a database service, so it won't depend on notifications. So this kind of will get us into that scenario. And then we can also have a database layer that will only provide a database and not require anything. This is a leaf node in our system. So composed or fulfilled calendar, in order to get this to work, I'll say layer.provide, and then we'll take our calendar layer, or let me do it with the pipe syntax. I'll take the calendar layer, and we want to provide to this layer.provide, the database layer. And if we look at the type here, it doesn't have any dependencies any longer. So if I toggle the type annotation, we'll see that it's never, never, never. And then we can just delete those. So we've successfully fulfilled its database dependency by piping in a database to it. But where Kit, this gets
but Kit, what if you also want the database? What if you also want the database to be present in the output? How would you do that?
Yes. So if there's a few different tools, and so I think we should we could look at these I guess abstractly. I don't know if people love looking at things abstractly, but okay. So I'm gonna make some notation here. So some layer notation, right? So we are gonna have, it's gonna look like this. We're gonna have our inputs, and then we're gonna have a little arrow, and we're gonna have our outputs. So and then maybe I'll have a name here. So this is a crazy notation. So we have our calendar layer needed a database, and it returned a calendar, for instance. And then we provided, so we had our database layer, had no inputs, and it provided a database. And by calling provide, what provide does is it takes the outputs from the thing that you're providing and removes these from the inputs. It's it's plugging things into each other. It's making a pipeline. So very abstractly, layer one, this is where we're going to get slightly abstract. Layer one, let's make it like this, AB. Layer two, BC. What this is going to do is, when we provide, it's going to get us back a new layer that has eradicated these innards and basically collapsed the pipeline. Oh gosh, this is probably confusing, but this is the trickiness of layers. You really need a lot of graphs to explain it. So now the layer we get back goes from A to C. So if the thing that you provided had its own dependencies, these kind of get moved. It's really like a function pipeline. So really, to make it even more concise, it's like you had an A to B, and you provided this to a B to C. It's like function composition, really, and the innards get collapsed, and now it's from A to C.
It literally is function composition.
It's literally function composition with, some maps inside and a little bit of weird internals, but theoretically you can think of it like this. And of course,
Kit, I really want my database service in the output.
Okay, well, we'll go to that example. I thought it would be useful to fully look at the real functionality of provide, which is that it will the inputs will move over as well to that final output layer. It's just that in this case, our database layer didn't have any transitive inputs, so it just gave us a B, such that when we collapsed it, we went from basically no inputs to C. Okay, so that's sort of the pattern of provide. Let me do this. So AB, when provided to BC, gets you the result is A to C. So we'll look, okay, that's provide. Boom. Now we'll look at provide merge. What's the pattern of provide merge? The pattern of provide merge is we can look at the same thing, except it's provide merge. And it's very similar, except notice how when we provided this layer that outputted a B to one that required a B, that B disappeared, as we saw, kind of that inside collapsed. This does the same thing, except the B does not disappear. It also is included in the output set. So it's like provide, but it also will continue to expose this in the output layer. So you can provide this further. Exactly. And to get this to type check, this will need to include the database. So cool. So now we have provided the database, removing the dependency, but we've also propagated it beyond, which can be convenient in certain circumstances.
There's a good question in the chat related to provide and provide merge, and maybe you can address that as part of provide. The question was,
yes.
I'll actually put it on screen. If I want to supply a database layer to an event layer, for example, I just provide it again to that. Doesn't that create it twice?
So here's the interest. So the reason why layers are their own distinct types is a couple things. Like they're basically wrappers of effects. You wrap an effect to create a layer for the most part. And most of their heavy lifting is determined by effects capabilities. It just runs the underlying effect and gets whatever instance that you're generating there. So the calendar, the database. There are two reasons why we can't just delete layers. One is that it sort of has this fancy type trick where we use this union type It's a phantom type. There's no type that is a union of, first of all, these two strings, but in the real world, these would be two interfaces. We're not creating some mecha interface. There's no actual value at runtime that is both a calendar and a database. We're simply using this at the type level as basically as a type level set to track what types this provides or what types we require. So it's disjoint from the underlying runtime to some degree, which is known as a phantom type. When you have a type in the type system at the type level that does not correspond to a runtime value of that type, it's a phantom type. Used for bookkeeping and nice compilation error. Getting good compilation errors, rather, that are meaningful. But to answer your question, which I've rambled too far to forget, can you repeat that one more time?
The question was, what if you do this?
Oh, yes. So the second, I really backed up far to answer your question. So the first reason is that fancy type level behavior. The second reason why layer is its own distinct types, and why this actually is going to, at some point, it seems like it's going to get sad. We're going to have too many arguments for pipe, but it uses the identity of the underlying layer, like the reference equality of this underlying value to deduplicate. So when you call provide, effect.provide, it's going to, not layer.provide, mind you, effect.provide, which is a little tricky, and we'll look at that in a moment. It will track the layers that have been constructed. Basically, it'll make a map out of all your constructed layers, a memoization map, I think it's called a memo map, and look up values by their layer identity in them. So it's built and memoized and tracked by construction. So you can use them redundantly, with the caveat that it has to be the same underlying layer. Which does mean that there are certain situations, if this didn't just generate the layer, but instead took an argument of some name, string, it doesn't matter if you would call this multiple times with the same name, these would generate different layers, and they would have different identities, and they would be created multiple times. So generally, you want to make sure you're dealing with actual fully realized layers when you compose them.
To summarize Kit's points there, I think like one of the key takeaways is like if you have a concrete instance of a layer and you provide it 1,000 times in your layer graph, as long as you're always using the same instance of the layer that like you have there, it will be built and memoized, so it only gets actually built once. Every other time in the layer graph, the memoized version is reused. The problem that Kit just brought up is a really key one, which is like if your database layer requires a argument to be constructed, right? Like if all of these are functions, then you'll end up with n database layers in your app. So you would have to like extract this out, do my database layer equals, you get the idea, right? Like, so the key takeaway here is like layers are memoized by reference. So you have to make sure you're always working with the same reference. And that's called out specifically in the docs. So if you have a layer that's built by, or a layer that's returned from a function, you're going to have, if you keep calling that function, you get a different reference back. It's not the same memory location, right? So yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So these will be two different layer values that are eventually constructed, and therefore they'll have different reference identities. And you may not like that. Most of the time, you will, if you just follow the normal patterns, you won't run into this problem. But it is good to know in case it would be very confusing, and probably if you didn't know what you were doing and you were making the assumption that truly everything were deduplicated, but you didn't. You called a function in too many places, and then it was actually constructing multiple layers or something. Hopefully, maybe we'll eventually have some tools for visualizing this, and like the dev tools, how many layers are actually constructed, and maybe calling attention to those situations. That's a job for tooling, unfortunately. But in the happy path is mostly what you'll be taking, and this will all just kind of work. So yeah, there's provide merge. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say maybe we can like tackle merge really quick.
Yes, and then there's merge, and I'll just keep doing this in a sort of very generic way, which may or may not be a good idea. So a merge, I'll have another function from C to D here, because with merge, basically the inputs and outputs are both merged. So you're going to get back a layer that requires both of the inputs, so A and C, and it'll output B and D. So A, you had one layer that needed an A and got you back a B, one layer that needed a C and got you back a D, and merging combines them. And so provide merge, as you can see, kind of does both of these things. And I think if you merge and it happened to have B here, it wouldn't actually satisfy it at all. So it would still be A and B, B and D. So provide merge is kind of the intersection of both of these, where it will combine the outputs and it will combine the inputs as well. Like, let's say I had B2 or something in here. That B2 would certainly be an input. But if it can provide one of these inputs, like the B, it does, and it erases that from the input. So these are basically ways of constructing your dependency graph out of layers. So if we look at our little tree structure here, generally what you'll do is, if starting from the leaf nodes, if you have a situation like this, do I have my I want that little icon, that nice, here it is. Oh, it's in my history somewhere. Boom. Give me that. Yeah. Oh, that doesn't look good at all. Okay, never mind. But if you have this situation where you have a parent and a child service, you're going to provide, let me make a new line. You're going to provide the child layer.provide the child to the parent calendar service. And that's how you will satisfy this. You provide the children to their parents. In Zio, we call this vertical composition. Maybe that makes sense to you. If you imagine this as a normal tree, this would be beneath this one, so you're sort of composing vertically. And then for this, when we look at a case where users has multiple dependencies, we would first take the children and merge them. So database service and notifications, which will get us back a layer that outputs both of these. And then we have all the requirements necessary to provide them to the parent. So then we would say layer.provide users this. So if you defined everything in one big code block, it would look something like the tree, just in a slightly different order, and maybe nested in a slightly uglier way. But yeah, it's basically going to be that same tree structure. I'm going to have to tab in a bit here. So yeah, if I basically move this into onto their own lines, it's the same exact structure. It's users, and then database notifications, database. I did this backwards. Calendar service, database service.
I think what Kit is pointing out here is really nice. It kind of gets back to the point I made originally, which is like, if you just follow the types in 99% of circumstances, you'll be fine. There are some unique circumstances where that's not the case, where layers have like kind of side effecty behavior. But we can maybe talk about that at a different time. I think if you just are working with, a service and you're looking at the requirements and the outputs of a layer, I think if you follow like eliminating the requirements as much as you can and doing them locally as much as you can, as close to where you construct that dependency as you can, you'll end up in a good place. There's always exceptions to the rule, but I think that's like a really good pattern to follow.
And I believe, I'm not sure if we can show it off here, but I do believe Mattia is adding some tooling to do this for you in some way. Like back when I was working on Zio, this is something that I solved using macros, because this is a very common problem in Zio. It's very useful to have layers, and once you understand layers, it's great. I couldn't imagine writing complicated programs in any other way. Like it just solves a huge pain point. Once again, that big main file churn. It just makes it. I have my code taste is determined by like I have a little internal barometer for how much code anxiety I feel, and layers just like eliminates. It just calms me down. It's like I don't really take what do you call it? Maybe I should take Prozac, but I would imagine it's like taking Prozac. I took Prozac once for a flight, and it gave me a panic attack. That's my anxiety that has no solution. But it's something like layers had, I guess, the ideal Prozac effect on my internal anxiety barometer. It's like, ooh, this is the way I want all programs to be shaped and to be written. Everything can be nice and co-located. It's organized. It's clean. It's good if you have code OCD. Very much. Now, I think Mattia, as I mentioned, the resident tooling expert, came up with a solution for this in the newest version of the LSP, and I should really figure out exactly what that is. Let me try something really quickly and see if we get a nice error message for it.
While Kit's trying something, I'll address a few questions that have come up around Effect 4, because I know that it's on everybody's mind. Effect 4 release window, do we have an estimate? No. Where are we currently? We are working towards getting an official beta release out. The ideas that we have for working up to a stable release at the moment, it's not finalized, but the idea that we have is right now we're in alpha. We're only publishing snapshot releases from the Effect Small repo. So if you go into the Effect Small repo and you search the GitHub Actions, you can find the URLs to the snapshot releases, and you can install them and play with it if you want to. We're working towards a beta, the first beta releases that we would do. Beta releases will also be published out of the Effect Small repo, and there's basically just some cleanup and porting that we need to do in order to start getting betas out the door for you folks to test. We don't have a timeline for that. We're hoping within the next few weeks, but things are taking a little bit longer than we expected. So we don't want to commit to a timeline because we want to make sure we get it reasonably right. I'm gonna flip back to Kit in a second, but before I do, I just want to finish addressing this. Peter, do we have any information on Effect Days 2026? No, we don't. We don't have any locations. We don't have anything yet. The last few things I'll mention about Effect 4, after beta releases are after we're happy with the beta releases, we would start moving towards release candidates. Those would also be published out of the small repo, and only once we get to a stable place will we move the code into the main Effect repository and do away with the small repo. So there'll be a release schedule that'll go from beta to release candidate to alpha to stable. Those will all be published on NPM. For now, in alpha, we're only publishing snapshots. How would you guys feel about doing an office hours like this, but with code review of Effect code from the community? We would love that. I think for the next Effect office hours, we can try to figure out a way to submit code, or even we had Ben join earlier. Ben, did I get that name right? We could do something like that, and have folks hop on and share code with us, and we can talk about that as well. Live code review would be great. Tom, we'll admit you in a second. I'm going to let Kit show off whatever he's about to show off.
Yes, as I've been very excited over here because yes, it is. I think it's working. I'll talk to Mattia, but I was able to sort of figure out what I briefly saw. So we have our goal, right, which is to have an app layer constructed, and then we have all our layers, which theoretically should compose into this, but. Yeah, we could do that, providing and merging from the bottom up, merge these, provide them into these, merge this, provide them into whatever, merge these, provide them into this, and so on and so forth. But that's a lot of typing. Ideally, if we had macros, come on TypeScript team, add macros, this could all be figured out based on the type structures. That's what did in Scala. But looks like there's this, I don't know, I put them all in merge all. I forgot exactly how to do this, but it showed up. So prepare layers for automatic composition. Wow, okay. Oops. Not quite. I think do it on this one. Okay, there. And so now let's turn them all into an array, which have been cast as a target layer. And then I'm pretty sure you just pick what layer structure you want. We want just our final app. We don't care about exposing any internals here. And then compose layers automatically with target output services. Well, did that work? Oh my, actually this compiles because we're providing, yes, this is kind of another cool thing that you can do. You don't need to do the merging really because provide will provide to everything else as well. For instance, like if I remove notifications layer, this will require notifications, even though, user required notifications. But by providing, that output just kind of becomes the output of all of this. And if you provide calendar layer, that will provide calendar, but it won't remove notifications. So basically you're just accumulating all of these dependencies. So if you can topologically sort your layers and then provide them in order, it'll all work. And that seems to be exactly what that trick just did, which is super cool. I'm very curious if I delete notifications layer, which means this shouldn't work now, what'll happen. So I will compose layers automatically. And oh my God, look at that. It somehow figured out. Oh no, it just doesn't provide it. Okay, it went as far as it could. And then you see that notifications is still required here by the app layers. This is all crazy cool LSP stuff that Mattia has done. And and I'm sure it could be made better. I think he just deployed this. So that's a little secret for you too. Very cool. Anyway, that's all I know because I've just been experimenting in the background. So looks cool.
That is pretty cool. I did not know Mattia was even working on that. So kudos, Mattia. I frequently find out about the things that Mattia has worked on through somebody else telling me he did something, and I'm like, Mattia, you gotta get this stuff out there.
He made a YouTube short. That's how I saw it. It came up on my YouTube. It was a YouTube short, and he had his scarf on, and he was, going on about it. It was amazing.
I have not been on YouTube today. We gotta post those to X as well.
Yeah, and he's been doing a lot with the language server. Just we'll invite you in 1 second because someone just asked about the LSP. They don't get all of these cool features. The LSP is available. Go to search for language service, and then there's an installation guide, and then there's also towards the bottom a configuring diagnostics section. And he recently added something, or is it that? No, it's getting diagnostics at compile time. He recently added a little CLI patch. Anyway, what I like to do is just copy the README into a Claude code and say, set this up for me, Claude code, you demon, and let it do the work for you. But it's really good, and we should definitely spread the good word about it and integrate it more into the docs. And when we create the create effect app repo that can come fully configured for you, the create effect app CLI for V4 and all that stuff. Anyway, shall we talk to Tom?
Sure.
Okay. I will check mark you, Tom.
Hello, Internet people.
Hello, Tom.
Hello, Tom.
Cool. So, mostly just wanted to say hi since we're already 5 minutes overboard. But I guess my biggest question of the 37 I was considering, the final one that I settled on was, what is the best way that those of us who are not, in London or wherever effect is happening, help out, or at least not hinder the overall effect process? Because I like JavaScript in 2001, MooTools in 2006, React in 2013. I have decided to go all in on effect. I am never going to write any TypeScript code without effect ever again, which is going to, until, I guess 2036. We'll see. And so I'm trying to go all in every single direction, fully go into the effect ecosystem, which is very painful because I have arbitrary opinions that are just slightly different, tabs versus spaces and BS like that. That's part of the process of forcing myself to get over it, doesn't matter. This is how we do it in effect, okay? It's layer.layer. Just deal with it. It's not layer. It's effect.effect.effect.effect. It's fine. It's just hold your nose. It's fine. But Anyway, so contributing to open source stuff in the effect ecosystem, how can we, like, what's the kind of rule of thumb of like what should be contributed back to effect itself versus like some completely separate package versus maybe it's not even a pattern that's really like appropriate for the effect ecosystem and there's just some fundamental misunderstanding of the right way to do it in the effect. Anyway, that kind of stuff.
I think those are great questions. I could try to answer a few of them. We're like extremely open to contributions and open source. Like the project is open source for a reason. I think like we don't have a rule of thumb about what goes into the core monorepo versus what doesn't. I think where we draw the line is like, is this something that we can commit to maintaining ourselves? Because we know that with open source, contributors come and go, but the core team is responsible for maintaining whatever we say we're responsible for maintaining. And we sort of like draw the line at whatever's under our org. And right now, like the main monorepo is like where most of our focus has been. Obviously, Effect Small as well, but that's kind of like our rule of thumb. Is most of those discussions usually happen in our community Discord. So like if you have a package or a project that you think is worthwhile trying to upstream, like we can have the conversation in Discord publicly. I think like that's usually how we end up going about these things. I think like, yeah, but we're not closed off to like those types of things. We contributing back to the main core library. If you see things that are wrong, we try to do our best about like reviewing PRs and things like that, but we are a very small team. And we have a lot of things that we're maintaining currently. We have a lot of things in flight. So, we do our best, but we may lose track of things and whatnot. So keeping the discussion in Discord, about like whether or not something should be upstreamed is like a really great place to start. And then if we all decide like it makes sense to upstream it, that's kind of what the process has always been. And then I don't know if I answered all of the questions you had, but for like contributing back to effect, that's like what I would say would be the best process. Usually those discussions start on Discord, and like if we end up thinking like it makes sense to upstream, we would upstream it.
Cool. Sounds perfect.
But as far as like what we're interested in at the moment, like I think anything really cool ways to use effect, but I think we're really interested in hearing more about or seeing ways that we can help people learn effect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was definitely a huge issue for me. Of like, I decided to go all in on it, and it still took me months to, and then even still, I'm finding things of just like, oh crap, I haven't fully, just like creating a new data structure that's like effectedy in the effect way. It helps. I checked out the effect small repo, and the dot patterns folder has a bunch of markdown files with some good documentation of like, here are the patterns that you should be using. Like, oh crap, where was this on day one?
Yeah, some of that is for the LLMs, but like I agree with you. It could be useful to humans as well, right? It's like there's some good stuff in there, and like we know that there's a barrier to like entry, and we acknowledge that now. We want to try to reduce that though. Like there was a while back where we tried to say you only need 20 methods to be effective, blah, blah, blah. But now we know like that there's definitely like a barrier to entry. You sort of have to rewire your brain to program an effect, or with effect. But like the benefits that you get, obviously, like the community can tell you is there. But like that's one of the reasons why working with Kit has been so great, because his shaped brain, helps us to figure out like really nice ways to explain things.
Cool. So I guess that is one way I could help out the community at large is like blogging more. I haven't blogged in a couple of decades, but if I blogged about some of the effect thing, just like understanding that context. It's like what if an argument, but side loaded. Oh, okay, easy.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Like, I think just people, I don't know. I like reading multiple takes on the same topic, even if there is ever like a canonical. This is our golden way of teaching layers. Stereoscopic learning is a very useful technique. Just reading 10 articles about the same topic to actually understand it. Like, just
people have very different learning styles. So like what is natural for one kind of person is just like that only makes it worse for a different kind of person. Cool. Okay. That's all I got. Goodbye.
Cool.
Amazing.
Good to see you, Tom.
Great chatting with you. Thank you, Tom. And yeah, come back again. I mean, obviously this thing is also part of that effort as well. And you can see where I had a list of questions. We got to some of them. We're kind of stumbling through this and figuring it out. I'm just thinking about it now. Like, I really like the call-in feature now that we know that works. That's pretty great. So we'll definitely prioritize that going forward. We should probably wind down soon. If I've missed questions and you really want them answered, because I definitely did, shoot them on Discord.
Is there a channel for the event itself? Because if there's a channel,
I don't think so. Maybe we should, if we keep this up for another couple of weeks, maybe we can talk to Marilla about getting our own Effect Office Hours channel or something like this. But for
I'm
now,
a Discord admin. I can create it.
Ooh, all right. Maybe we should just do it then. And then we can collect things there. And I think what you said earlier, or maybe somebody asked, if you have code examples from work, if you want to create a reproducer or copy paste something, a simplified version, do that. And we'll take a look at it. That'll be great. I mean, we can only type so quickly. And so if there's a really good juicy example, I'll prepare something ahead of time where we could actually look at running code instead of these fake string stubs. But if you bring your own questions with your own code, we could take a look at that, or PRs, or whatever. We'll figure it out. Should we take one last call question before we
why not?
Head out? Okay, Matthew's calling in. Hello, welcome to Effect Office Hours. Oh.
Hey, Matthew.
Hello.
Hey, guys. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good, thank you. I'd first like to start by thanking you both for all of your YouTube content. I've been learning so much from you both. I commented on your Thunk video.
Thank you.
That was probably about a month or two into learning it. I left that really weird, creepy comment, I think, on Twitter about hiding in the bushes. That was me. So name to face.
Perfect. It's good to hear you.
Yeah. No, that Thunk video you did was amazing. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And I've watched a few of your live streams as well on Twitch, Maxwell. On Twitch? I asked this question in Discord and also in the chat here. What I'd like to know is, like with context.tag and soon to be possibly services, you pass like a string identifier to them both, right? And then that string identifier is supposed to be unique, like you namespace it, like the file path and the file name or whatever it may be, and then that becomes the key in the context to look up like the instantiated like singleton or whatever it is of that particular service. What I would like to know is like, why use that key at all? Why have a string identifier as opposed to just using like the class itself as the key in the map? Because I haven't looked at the innards of like context, but I imagine it's like a simple like map or something like that where the key could be anything. It doesn't have to be a string, or maybe it does. I watched a video from Michael talking about this. It used to be a symbol and then they moved to strings because it made the errors easier to reason with or understand when they threw. But what I'm still trying to wrap my head around is like when you're yielding or calling pipe on a tag or on a service, you have to have that like imported into wherever you're consuming it, right? You import your service, you import your tag so that you can yield it, right? So you're not yielding or piping from like that string identifier. That string identifier is kind of like baked into the construction of, or the definition of your tag. So like, I guess my question is, why have these identifiers at all? Why don't you just use the class itself?
Yeah, that's a good question.
As the key?
There are a few reasons. Some of them I probably won't mention or don't know, and Mike can yell at me later for being like, why don't you know this? But one of the main reasons is that context the tags themselves don't always have to be classes. They can just be constants. So there is the tag API where you can extend from, it's the mix-in API is like, I think I've heard it called that, where you can like extend context.tag and create it as a class. That just gives you like a nice like opaque identifier for the context tag. That's one way to do it, but there's even a step down from that, which we really don't mention anywhere, but it is used internally some places, where we have something called a context.generic tag, and that is actually just a constant. This isn't like the main reason why we can't use a class as the identifier. It's just like one reason. The main reason is because, like you said, underneath the hood, it is just a map of like string to service. And having a string identifier, there's a variety of reasons. More of the technical reasons Mike could probably like speak to, or Tim. One of the like UX reasons that I like about using string identifiers is you get really nice error messages if the tag is missing. I mean, if that service is missing in the context that you're yielding. If you don't have a string identifier or something else that's stable, you'll get a completely like unreadable error message, especially if you're minifying while you're bundling. You'd think you could use the class name, but like if you're minifying, the class name goes away and you get some minified garbage. So that's why we lean into string IDs in a lot of different places, is because you can ensure that won't be like minified away. So that's another reason why having the string there is helpful. What else?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I don't know if either of you saw my post in Discord. I think I posted it yesterday. But the thing that when I was messing around with this, I was like trying to break it, or at least test my understanding of context tag and all the rest of it. I had like two separate like tags that had separate interfaces. Well, one was just like literally a string and another one was a number. Right, so I just did context.tag. I didn't pass it an object or anything like that. It's just like a string and a number. And I called it like just service 1 or service 2, or we'll just call it like string service and number service, just for example's sake. But then if you accidentally were to use the same string identifier, it's a very, very subtle but like nefarious like issue, isn't it? Because depending on which one you provide first, like it will resolve to that inside of like the context map. So from a type perspective, like when you're yielding like string service and number service, you're getting like the typed value back. So nothing breaks from a type perspective. But when you're then providing those string service and number service, because you use that same string identifier like twice, you don't get any kind of runtime errors. It compiles fine and everything like that. It's just, but at runtime, both of those services will resolve to the whatever you've provided as the first one, to that kind of string identifier. So I had a conversation in Discord and tagged like Martina saying, you know, is that something that the LSP could pick up on to, you know, shout at you if you did a copy and paste job from like another service, right, and you forgot to update your string identifier, then this could be like you'd quickly discover it, obviously, but you're discovering it at runtime, which is what you're trying to avoid with effect, right? You want
I mean, there are definitely other technical reasons for it that I'm just not thinking of. Another benefit to the string ID versus like leaning into like the class itself or something, or the instance, the class itself, is you can use the string when you want to do things unsafely with context. So like, for example, in the AI packages, for example, I can actually index into a context object unsafely with the string identifier when I need to. So there are some benefits to having the string ID even beyond like what the technical reasons are. Maybe I can, if you ping me, I'll allow a direct ping, just this once. You can ping me into that conversation, and I can try to get, you know, the bigger brains than my own into the conversation as well.
I just shared the link in the channel there, I believe. Also, we had an office hours channel created, so maybe I'll paste it in the office hours channel link as well. Clarification of the use of ID.
Oh man, Mirella did it first. Darn.
She did it. She has all the glory goes to Mirella.
Just one last thing on the tagging thing. The other thing that I found helpful with and we actually had like a 20-minute discussion at Effect Days during the workshop about this as well. So if you want more content on why string identifiers exist, I don't remember all of the discussion we had there, but if you pull up that YouTube video from when I did our workshop there were a lot of questions about this, and I was actually really surprised. But a nice pattern that I lean into in almost all the projects I write with Effect is to just use the project name and then the path to whatever file I'm in, and then the name of the service I'm working with. So that literally will always... There's no chance you could not have a unique string identifier if you do that. There's absolutely no chance. Because you can't have the same file path with the same service name like existing, unless I'm mistaken.
Well, I think Matthew's point was maybe that it would be like you could accidentally always copy paste something and forget to change it. And I think just to address that quickly, I think that's just one of the challenges of TypeScript a little bit. Like sometimes you do see these repetitions for various reasons. Effect, be it layer.layer, effect.effect, or if you have an effect.service, you have the class name and you have the identifier and that matches the class. I think just because there isn't a lot of meta programming. There isn't compile time programming. You kind of just need to have a little bit of denormalization to get things to work. And it's a balance of like, is it worth the runtime characteristics or whatever for that sort of manual human compile time code that you need to do, write time code, editing time, whatever. But sorry, what were you going to say? I think I cut you off, Matthew.
No. I mean, 100%. I mean, if you read the documentation and the guidance, you're going to follow it, right? And you're going to namespace all of your tags and your services, and you're going to be like a good citizen. But I guess like Effect is gaining a lot of traction. I imagine that in the not too distant future, we're going to see a lot of third-party modules from the community, and if those services. If the people who have offered those services perhaps haven't, I mean, there'll be a GitHub issue pretty quickly for it. I know it would kind of be self-healing issue, but what I'm saying is if you're like, consuming services like tags or whatever from NPM or whatever it may be, and they're not namespaced and, you're not namespacing your own things, there's just that possibility of them kind of clashing and it not being immediately obvious to you until you run into that issue that I described inside of Discord where you provide, the implementation for like a key that is already in the context.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think like they'll if something like that grows in the future, there'll probably be like a recommendation we'll have to I think in the chat somebody said vendor prefixing things, it will make sense, and maybe we'll find a solution to it in the future. But at the moment, this is what we have. This is the best solution we've come up with. And Mike actually did respond in your thread here, saying that in addition to the reasons that Max discussed in the office hours, there's a quote unquote dumb reason too, which is that the class identifier is not technically stable. Because a module could be loaded multiple times, for example, when tree shaken and bundled into different chunks. So using it as the identifier is not actually the best solution. And then also, as a final reason why a string is better than a class ID, the class could be generic, in theory. So for all of those reasons, we leaned into string IDs. I think we lost Kit briefly, but yeah, so... It's not the first. It's not the first time this discussion has come up, and maybe we'll find a better solution in the future. But for now, like strings are where we, like the best thing we've come up with, basically. So, no problem, Matthew. Thank you very much for the question. And yeah, cheers. All right, folks. I think Kit's internet blew up. So I think we are going to... I like how in the chat it says me and then Kit said the same thing. really appreciate all of you folks attending. We'll try to keep doing this, I think, on a weekly basis, and maybe next time, like it was suggested, we'll ask folks to come armed with code you want reviewed. And as long as you folks are comfortable with that code being publicly shared and streamed, we can definitely take a look and review it with you all. Thank you all very much. I hope you all have a good rest of your day, and cheers. We'll see you guys next time. Later, everybody.